Okay, so now I have to ask, how did you get on this path? Because you are a comparative studies graduate of Duke University. I love that you went to Duke. But that's a liberal arts program. So how did you find yourself in this world of technology? And I ask that only because I was a history major from Duke that ended up in the advanced technology division of Bechtel. I got out.
So we'll have to compare notes on how you did it.
Yeah.
The way I did it was quite by accident, and it all started with what I considered to be a great big failure in my early life. And it just goes to show that life is full of zigs and zags, and sometimes you have successes and you learn, and sometimes you fall flat on your face, but you can learn from that as well. So my dream coming out of Columbia, which I attended after Duke, and I got a master's in international affairs, was to be a diplomat. I wanted to be in the Foreign Service. So after Columbia, I moved to Washington, and I applied to the Foreign Service and was rejected. So I thought I had all the credentials that an international affairs degree could bring. But whatever it was, they did not select me that year. And I just remember as a young 22-year-old crying in bed for 5 days, because what would I do with my life now? And I had spent all this time focused on one career goal, and it just went up in smoke. Yeah. So of course, after 5 days, I had to get up because I needed a job and I needed a paycheck. And so I then got involved with a program called the Presidential Management Intern Program and was hired by the Department of the Army. Now, the Presidential Management Intern Program had a broad view of people who were interested in government. That is to say, you join one organization, but you can rotate to other organizations. So I joined the Department of the Army as a civilian. It was not my heart's desire. If anything, I thought, oh, what do I know about the military? But it was a job, and I was grateful for the job. And I threw myself into it and did my best. And then within a few months, I had a great boss. I loved the team. The work was really interesting. You see, it opened my eyes to something I had really never thought about or looked at before. Yeah. From there, I had interesting rotational assignments, including in Ronald Reagan's White House on the National Security Council staff. So now I was really getting smitten or bitten by the bug of politics and government at different levels and different parts of government. From there, I went to the House Armed Services Committee. So now I've also seen Capitol Hill and did that for 10 years, and from there into the Pentagon as an Assistant Secretary of Defense. And from there, I launched into a business career, which actually started out in business development. I evolved into having a P&L role down the line. But the key thing I learned was, even in highly technical companies, they need people who can sell, they need people who have a business sense, they need people who can translate highly technical concepts into what can it do for this customer, and here is the value proposition. And so I found that became my niche, and obviously through the years, I learned much more about technology than I started out knowing, though I'm clearly not a technologist by training. So my launching, I'll say, into the technology industry was really first via business development, and it was heavily dependent on communication skills and people skills, because even in a highly technical field, you need someone who can translate, someone who can sell, someone who can talk to customers, and the higher up you go through the leadership chain, the more important it becomes that you can deal with your colleagues, with your bosses, with those who are serving under you, so those people skills are really critical.
So you moved into the P&L responsibility that ultimately led you into an opportunity to actually help design the split, the famous split between SAIC and Leidos. Is that right?
Right.
Tell us a little bit about that, how that strategy came about, what the board's role was in it, what was your role in it, and because that actually was certainly during a time when most of the government contractors were acquiring. You all were deciding to restructure your strategy going forward that led to the decision to split SAIC. So are you able to share some information about that?
Yes.
Yeah.
So I was a total of about 12 years with SAIC in totality. Started out in business development, became a business unit general manager. I then became the head of government affairs and communications, actually during a period of what was a big scandal within the company. So talk about crisis training for communications. I felt like I learned it on the job. And from there, I became a P&L leader for about a $2 billion piece of the company's revenue. During that period, in between communications and government affairs and taking on that larger P&L role, I was in both jobs, a direct report to the CEO, and of course a direct report was part of the C-suite and was in with the board all the time. So it was during that period that the decision was made to spin the company into two separate entities, what we now know of as the new SAIC and the company called Leidos. And I was also then appointed to be the co-architect, along with another person, for the new SAIC. So it was a fascinating time where we actually, and we had teams of people supporting us, we actually had the opportunity, as close as you can possibly come with an established company, to start with a clean sheet of paper and build a company from the bottom up. So we looked at different organizational designs, we looked at processes and procedures, we had comparisons from other companies, what worked, what didn't work. And so out of all of this, we really transformed SAIC from what had been a decentralized, eat what you can kill kind of an environment where multiple units did similar things, and they all owned their own people, both technical and those who sold, those who were in business development, to a company which exists today, which is composed of customer units and then service lines. So it's a traditional matrix approach. And the ownership of people, not so much anymore, because people are sent to whatever customer group or whatever job where they're needed, so that we're looking out across the company and our capabilities and putting the best of the best on the task. So that was a major change. Change management was huge during this period, because those who had been at SAIC, and by the way, I had been at SAIC probably for 9 or 10 years at this point, they all looked at me and said, "What have you done to us? How could you have come out with such a plan?" And so there was a lot of questioning in the beginning, and so change management was very important. But over time, I think it's paid good dividends. The company has done well.
Significant organizational redesign like that changes the employees' engagement and how they actually connect with the corporation. Where do you see, how would you describe the culture as you left it versus what the culture was before it was split? And how does that culture support the corporate strategy going forward, or at least the design of the corporate strategy going forward? Because I know that they plucked you out of there to become Secretary of the Air Force.
The culture when I first started at SAIC was very much the traditional culture of the company, which was every small unit, every small team of people was dedicated to its customer. That's what they knew. That's all they cared to know. There was not sharing of information across the board. There wasn't any desire or perceived need of reaching out for other experts. And their whole incentive structure focused on their slice of the pie and how well it did, and nothing beyond that.
Well, it was almost even set up, as my understanding is that it was set up intentionally to be competing silos.
You're right.
Yeah.
And that's exactly was the idea of the founder, founded the company in 1969. And it was fabulously successful up until a point. But that kind of an approach doesn't scale when you're into the billions of dollars, because customers have a way of getting annoyed when they're marketed by 4 different people in the same week who are essentially talking about the same types of skills and capabilities.
I think it also doesn't apply to the current workforce dynamics, the demographics, the type of mindset, you know, so it worked at the time, and it worked great, because you look at how large they were able to grow, 12 billion was in revenue.
Right.
But you're right. In order to be able to move forward and with effectiveness and agility, you needed to actually redesign in a different way.
Right. And I think the culture when I left SAIC was much more along the lines of, we've got to look across the company. We've got to bring the best of the best. If we don't, we won't get the innovative new approaches, and we'll lose our existing business over time. We'll lose our recompetes. And as we try for new work, we won't be successful there either. So I think the culture shifted to much more one of the entirety of the company and bringing the full force of the company to bear, as opposed to the highly entrepreneurial one-offs that made us so successful, but which didn't scale ultimately when we got larger.
So I think there'll be a fascinating case study at some point. I'm sure Harvard is already calling folks over there to do the case study on it.